Welcome back, everybody. I'm delighted to be chairing this second session of this exciting meeting. My name is Janet Kamita, and I'm from the pharmacology department. So just to get started right away, since we are a little bit behind time, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ben Underwood. And Ben's an assistant professor in applied and translational old age psychiatry at the University of Cambridge, and he's an honorary consultant psychiatrist at the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough NHS Foundation Trust. And so Ben's here to discuss how can we improve clinical dementia care now and in the future. So
thank you very much indeed. So it's quite an ambitious title, isn't it? But I'll see if I can live up to it. Also, the putting your hand in the air is a great trick that a primary school teacher taught me. But if you need a room to be quiet, it works on primary school children and apparently professors of neurology. So the introduction did sort of sum me up. Really, I'm not a clever professor like many people in this room. I'm a clinician, but also I spent a long time as an NHS manager. And actually that informed the sort of work that I'm doing now to try and deal with the problems that the patients brought to me. My first slide, though, is to remind us how important our work is, because I think it's often easy to forget that. I was struck, this is a little statistic that I discovered, but I was very struck by this. So in 2018, 69,000 people in the UK died of dementia. In 2020, the peak COVID year in the UK, before there were vaccines and when we were all locked down and it was all rather dramatic, 69,000 people died of COVID. So these two things are entirely comparable. And yet somehow we kind of forgot, maybe we've got inured to dementia, or maybe it's because we think it happens to old people. But for some reason, the effort and drive that galvanized the country here doesn't seem to have transferred through to dementia, and it needs to, because I think the impact, one of the drives for COVID was, of course, the impact on the economy and society, but I think dementia has no less of an impact. So this is something that really stuck in my mind during the pandemic, and now we're through the other side. It's fantastic to see things like Professor Mummery's talk with all of the things that are developing, because this is the time when dementia care and treatment is really going to blow up. So this is me now back as an NHS manager. I was responsible for all of the dementia services in Cambridge, or nearly all of them, those that aren't in Addenbrooke's anyway. We see in Cambridgeshire now about 3,000 people a year for a memory assessment. And generally, people are very happy with their care and treatment. In 5 years, so well over 10,000 people, we only got 12 complaints. This is the friends and family test where nearly everybody says it's great. But there's a caveat to that. So they say, it's great. I come to the clinic, I get my diagnosis, I get my treatment, such as it is, I get the support, I'm sorted out, but then I'm discharged. And people see it as being abandoned off the edge of a cliff. That, it's very, very difficult. And in an ideal world, you'd follow up people from the time of diagnosis all the way through their disease journey. And I know my colleague, Professor Rowe, is very keen advocate of that. But when I costed that up on the back of an envelope, the financial cost of it was huge to follow all those people up, but also the practicality of it. Finding enough doctors and nurses to do it meant it just wasn't possible. So what have we got that can help us, and what can we do? So fortunately, I've got a very clever colleague, Professor Rudolph Cardinal, here in Cambridge, who has taken our electronic patient record that we use clinically and for now more than 10 years. And every 24 hours, this is turned into an anonymized patient record where all of the data in it is still available for research, but with all of the patient identifiers taken out. So that is a fantastic tool. We're only limited really by our imagination as to what we can do with that. So I'm aware of this tool, I'm aware of this problem, and I'm thinking, what can I do about that? How can I bring these things together? So our current model was that we'd see people in memory clinics, we diagnose them, we kind of sort them out, and then we discharge them back to their GP. Some of those patients would deteriorate, and they'd end up in either the psychiatric hospital or increasingly under our community crisis teams for dementia. But it wasn't clear to me how big this population was. We didn't know how many people would end up like this. And we didn't know who they were, because if we could spot them at this point in diagnosis, if the people who ended up running into trouble and having a stormy disease course could be spotted at this point, then we could target resources of that group. We don't have to look after absolutely everybody. There's a high risk group that we can focus on. So this is what I've just explained to you. People, when they deteriorate, either end up under our community crisis teams or inpatient units. So our objectives with this study were to take our anonymized patient database and see if we could start by working out what proportion of patients really do deteriorate and need that enhanced care. We wanted to know the length of time between people being diagnosed and them needing that. Is there a window in which we can intervene? We wanted to see if you could actually spot at the time of diagnosis who it was that would run into trouble and what those variables might be that were predictive. Because I can tell you, the nurses in the clinic say, oh, we don't need to keep everyone on, Ben. We can tell the ones that are going to run into trouble. And the nurse is almost always right with those things, but you can't just do it on intuition. You need a bit more science, I think, than that. And then could we create mathematical models of risk, which would allow us to predict patients and look at proportions and what would happen to them over time? And we wanted to do that in Cambridgeshire, but then we wanted to do it in an independent data set as well. So these are the immediately available variables in the record. This is now massively more sophisticated. There's almost everything about the patient is now available in the latest iteration of this. But at the time we did this project, this is what we had. So we had diagnostic codes, we had demographic details, and we had some measures of the patients in terms of their cognitive scores, and also this, the Health of the Nation Outcome Scale, which is a psychiatric scale looking at general psychiatric morbidity. In time, already this has got hundreds and hundreds more variables. It's got blood tests, it's got all sorts of things in it now. And in time, we'll be tying in things like Tim Rittman's Cumin study and imaging and other data, and you can see that these models will get more sophisticated. But even with this basic model, let's see what we can do. So we start, I'm going to click through this a little bit. We started off with 13,000 patients with a diagnosis of dementia in our database. So this is chunky enough. If you're getting into the thousands, you can start doing things with machine learning and artificial intelligence and so on. But we actually stripped it right back to just 1,600, for which we had a completely full data set. We have repeated what I'm about to show you in every sensitivity analysis we can think of. So we've done it on the full data set, we've done it on only those with full values, and we get pretty much the same results each time. So actually, I've missed a little bit here. The first thing we discovered was that of the group, when we followed them up over the 10 years, only 12% of them ended up needing psychiatric inpatient care or crisis team care. If that number had been 95% of them, there'd be no point trying to identify them early on at the point of diagnosis, because actually if everybody needs that, you're going to have to put any intervention into absolutely everybody, which is exactly where we started from. But it isn't everybody, it's a minority. The next thing was, we wanted to know, do we see people and then they almost immediately run into trouble and they end up coming onto our wards, in which case we've got hardly any time to intervene. But to our surprise, the average time between us making the diagnosis and them needing that enhanced care was over 2 years. So there is plenty of time where we've got the potential to intervene. So can you spot these people at the point of diagnosis? Do they look different to people who don't end up running into trouble and needing enhanced care? So this is just one example. I could take you through many, but I'm not going to. This is just one example. You can see this is the Honos score, particularly for relationships. And these are the sort of differences you can see. I think even by eye, you can see that this curve is shifted to the right. It's not shifted to the right dramatically, but it is a little bit. And in large numbers of patients, this is good enough to start building models, because you get very small p-values because you've got a large number of people. When we start doing dominance analysis of those different characteristics, these are the things that are statistically significant in Cambridgeshire, and you can start building a model looking at the different things and which of them most contribute to those different outcomes. So we worked, this is bigging up my colleague Shankwan Chen, who's now moved down to London, but helped us with some of the mathematical modelling. Those in the room that know me will realise that it wasn't me that did this. So he was able to then start taking those variables and building models. And you can see that we can build models from the point of diagnosis over the next few years. And this gives you a sort of OROC of about 0.74. So this is chance here, this line running at 45 degrees across the diagram, and these RAM models here. So they're significantly better than chance. They're not 100%, they're not perfect, but this is what we get even with basic information. Imagine what we can do as we feed in more information and imaging data. We can really start refining this. And this is the sort of survival curve that you get. So these are our high-risk patients at time 0. The blue line is the non-high-risk patients. And you can see that 50% of the patients after around 5 years will have needed some of that enhanced care and input. So this now becomes entirely plausible. At the point of diagnosis, we can run the patients through the machine, through the algorithm, and we can put them into different stratifications of risk. And those in the highest risk then can have some interventions targeted at them. We'll give a little bit of thought as to what those might be in a moment. But the first thing was us just checking to see whether this is possible, and indeed it looks like it is. you see in the people at highest risk a 3.6-fold increase in their chance of admission. But of course, Cambridgeshire is only one data set. It might be something quirky about what we've got. It might be something quirky about our population. So we work with our colleagues down in London, South London and Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust. This is a lovely counterpoint to Cambridge because Cambridge is, let's face it, a predominantly white and affluent rural area. I don't think you can say any of those things about South London. So for example, around half of their patients have ethnic backgrounds other than Caucasian. So if it works here and it works in London, we might be onto something because it might work everywhere. And this is just to highlight those differences between our populations. So they've got a similar process. They've got a few more patients in their database, 14,000, 6,729 with an absolutely full set. But again, we've done all the sensitivity analysis. And what we find is that, in fact, it comes out with a very, very similar model. They have an OROC that's very, very similar to ours at 1 year, and almost exactly the same at 4 years. So in our population, in London population, this works really, really well. You can work out at the point of diagnosis with reasonable accuracy, even with basic data, who is going to have a stormy course. So what can we do about that? Well, we need an intervention. So we can make this model better and better. We can get that OROC 0.7, 0.8, 0.9 with a bit of luck. What are we going to do for them? Well, there's lots of evidence on that, but particularly around case management. And so Dementia UK have a phenomena or a model called Admiral nursing, where particular nurses work specifically with patients and families in quite a manualised way, and they're very interested in developing the evidence base for that. This is an Admiral nursing shaped hole, if ever I've seen one. So we're already talking to them because the next step would be to take our patients, identify those at high risk, have some of them have the intervention, others not. It's effectively a trial, and see if we can shift that curve and stop those people needing hospitalisation. It also goes some way to dealing with that patient-raised problem. I don't want to be discharged. I don't want to be abandoned. I don't want off the cliff edge. Well, for the people most at risk, then they won't be, and we can hold on to them. So this is a very short aside. So that's my pitch as to how we can use the tools that we have to make dementia services better now. We can spot people at high risk and intervene and help them. But what about the future? Well, we all want better treatments for dementia, and Professor Mummery has given us a fantastic and very encouraging story about how that is happening. And of course, the thing that's perhaps at the front row that might well be approved next year, monoclonal antibodies against amyloid. So as a previous health service manager, I know the first question is going to be, how many people are going to need this? How big is the problem going to be? And I saw a quote from industry where they were saying they thought it would be 4,000 people a year in the UK. There was some quotes in the press from the Alzheimer's Society saying it's going to be 104,000. And apparently there was a meeting at NHS England. I wasn't part of it, but I heard on the gossip vine where people were predicting it might absorb a third of the entire NHS budget. This seems to be completely overblown. When I tracked down each of those individuals and said, how did you get to that number? None of them could tell me. I don't know if they guessed it or, anyway. So I thought, well, we can do better than that because we've got our fantastic database. And we can then plan how many people need imaging, IV dosing. So exactly as Professor Mummery was saying, we need to start planning for this. You need to go to the politicians and say, this is our ask. But you've got to have something to hang that on. You can't just say, well, we want loads more scanners and so on. They'll say, well, what are the numbers? What are the requirements? So we took the entry criteria for the trials. It's really important. If you look at the trials of the monoclonals, there's huge dropout. Loads and loads of people are screened out. They don't get into the trial at all. So it's for a minority of people. And Professor Mummery is absolutely right. We can't leave everybody else behind. So this needs to be something for everybody. But how big is that group, that small number of people? So basically what we've done is we've taken our electronic patient records, both again in the Maudsley and in Cambridgeshire, and we've now got nearly 100,000 records that we've put through this, and we've taken the entry criteria for the trials. Because my own view is that if we're rolling this out in the clinical population, there shouldn't be mission creep. We should be giving the drug to the patients that did well in the trials, not everybody, or expanding it for good reasons. And you can start by saying, well, how many people are referred? How many are between the ages of 50 and 90? How many have got a new diagnosis of MCI or AD, so fall into the diagnostic criteria? How many have cognitive scores that were within range? They're not too low or too high. What about recent brain imaging? And here I was very lucky that Tim Rittman is here in Cambridge and was able to start looking at the early results from his CUMIN study where we were able to see how many people in our cohort had brain imaging that would screen them out because it's too vascular. We've got Professor Marcus coming up to tell us all about that. And then we can look at the national audit data. So we work with Jeremy Isaacs to look at how many people might be willing to consent to treatment and come forward. And this then gave us a number both in Cambridgeshire and the Maudsley, which turned out to be almost very, very similar again, which means that we can then say something much more certain about how many people. How many people do people think that is? 4,000, 100,000, a third of all of the NHS budget? What do people think? How many people think nearer the 4,000? A few. How many people think nearer the 100,000? More people. Well, it's the minority that are right. So when we do this, we work it out nationally. It's 22,000 people starting treatment each year. And then that reaches steady state after 3 years. You can look at the length of treatment and the dropout rate. So that gives us, I think, a much better way of calculating things and therefore predicting service requirements. So I'm going to finish there. My conclusions are anonymous patient data is a powerful tool for research. We hear a lot about blood biomarkers. We hear a lot about imaging. We should be tying those together. And we should be tying it in with all the stuff in the patient record as well. It's hugely powerful. So these are just two applications about how we can respond to the patient's complaints about current services and how we can plan things for the future. And that we can, these are very useful for changing our care on the ground, delivering new clinical trials, and also informing the NHS and our masters as to what we need to start delivering the new treatments, which will be arriving very soon. These are my friends, colleagues, and collaborators from all of these different institutions. And so many thanks to them. And I'm happy to take any questions if we have time left.